I stood in the back of the military ranking hall on classification day with my hands in my pockets, watching the rest of the awakened get their futures stamped onto a clipboard. 3 months earlier, the bloom had happened. Purple fungal spores erupted out of the ground in a single afternoon and turned 90% of humanity into zombies. The survivors built walled safe zones, and inside the walls the military ran everything. The rations, the housing, the patrols, the executions. Every human who'd awakened with an ability after the spores got called a carrier. Carriers got ranked S tier down to E tier based on combat utility. Your tier decided your food, your bed, and your right to exist. That morning was where I found out where I landed. A guy named Takeda walked up to the testing wall and pulled fire out of his palms in 2 thick streams. They stamped him B tier and the room clapped like he'd won a talent show. A girl named Ayoi raised both hands, and a sheet of ice grew across the entire testing partition in under 3 seconds. They stamped her A tier on the spot, which in practice meant premium rations and a private room for life. Then they called my name. I walked up.
Kaito!
The room went quiet for a second. I had the kind of face that made people pause, which had never once been useful for anything. The head officer had a face like he'd been chewing lemons since the apocalypse started. He pointed at the zombie chained to the post and told me to demonstrate. I walked over. I reached out. I pressed my palm flat against its forehead. The scar on my right palm lit up blue. The zombie's clouded eyes cleared. It blinked. It looked around. It whispered a woman's name like it was trying to remember something important. 60 seconds later, the light faded. The eyes went cloudy, and it was back to pulling at its chains. The head officer stared at his clipboard. What was that supposed to do? Restored its humanity, temporarily, through physical touch. For how long? 60 seconds. In combat? No. The room stayed dead silent. He picked up his stamp, slammed it on my file, and said one word. E tier. Someone in the back row whispered that it was the most useless ability they'd ever seen. From their perspective, they weren't wrong. In a world measured in zombie kills, a guy who could make one zombie sad for a minute was dead weight. The military's policy for E tiers, who couldn't prove their value within 7 days, was exile. I didn't even get the 7 days. Apparently, a minute of zombie sadness wasn't worth a week of rations. The transport rolled out 2 hours later. The truck moved through gray wasteland for 63 minutes before it stopped at a cracked highway overpass. The guard opened the tailgate, pointed at the empty road stretching into nothing, and told me to get out. No supplies, no weapon, no water, just the clothes on my back, and a scar that glowed blue for absolutely no useful reason. I stepped off the truck without saying anything. I landed on the broken asphalt, put my hands in my pockets, and watched the truck make a wide U-turn and disappear back toward the walls. The wind smelled like ash with something faintly sweet underneath. The sweet part was the spores. The sky had the faint purple tint the dead zone got near dusk. I started walking. By nightfall, I'd covered 8 kilometers without finding food, water, or shelter. My options for the next move were starve, dehydrate, or get eaten. I ducked behind a dumpster in a wrecked shopping district and sat down to think about which order they'd come in. Then I heard a groan from a busted doorway about 10 meters off. It came out dragging one leg, slow, shuffling, hunger-driven. A baseline. It saw me and turned. I had no weapon, no training, no plan. When it got close enough to grab, I threw my hand out on instinct. My palm hit its face. The scar lit up blue. The zombie stopped dead. Its eyes cleared. It looked at me, then at its own hands. An older man, maybe 50, gray hair, torn bus driver's uniform that still had a name tag clipped to the chest pocket. For 60 seconds, he was fully human, standing in a city he used to drive a route through, trying to understand what had happened to him. He looked at me. Where's my daughter? I didn't know. The light faded, the eyes clouded. He shuffled away down the dark street like the last minute had never happened. I stayed on the ground for a long time after. Then a blue translucent screen popped into my vision. Heartbeat system activated. Affection level 1 unlocked with subject A. Reward. 2 cans of rice, 1 bottle of water, 1 liter. 2 cans materialized in midair and dropped onto the asphalt with a soft clink. The water bottle followed half a second later. I picked the bottle up. I turned it over in my hands. Real. I tasted it. Real. I looked back toward the dark street. I could hear at least 3 more zombies shuffling somewhere a couple blocks over. I'd just gotten fed for touching a zombie. There were thousands of zombies in the dead zone. I cracked the can. I slept under a turned-over delivery van and woke with my back stiff and the sky already going pale violet. The cans were empty. The bottle was almost dry. I started moving deeper into the city looking for the next zombie to touch, because apparently that was my life now. That was when I found the flower shop. The window had been blown out. Glass scattered across the sidewalk in patterns that caught the morning light. The shelves inside were mostly intact. Half-dead bouquets stood in dry vases. A coffee cup sat on the register, 3 months old, ringed with mold. She was at the back of the shop, holding a watering can. She'd been holding it for so long she'd gone still around it. Pale blue skin, faintly luminous violet eyes, fungal flowers blooming through her hair in the spaces where real flowers used to go. She was also, even reading her like that, the prettiest zombie I had ever seen. I stepped through the broken window. She moved, not the usual lunge. She backed up. She knocked over a shelf. She hissed at me with her teeth bared. Her eyes weren't hungry. They were scared. She kept her body between me and a corner of the shop where she'd clearly been sleeping. Aware, I stopped where I was. I sat down on the floor, opened my second can of rice, and started eating. I didn't look at her. I didn't talk to her. I just took up space the way someone takes up space in a coffee shop they've decided to work in for the afternoon. She watched me from across the room with her shoulder pressed flat against the back wall. I finished the rice. I put the empty can down. I left. The next day I came back. Same thing. Sat on the floor. Ate. Said one thing without looking at her. Sky's more purple than usual. She didn't move. She didn't run. Day 3, she was a meter closer. Day 4, she was sitting on the floor across from me. Day 5, she picked up the food I'd left between us and held it without eating it. Day 6, she sat right next to me, close enough that I could feel the cold coming off her skin. That morning I realized I wasn't coming back to farm rewards from her. The system pinged a half-affection token every time I dropped food and walked away, but I'd stopped checking the notifications. I was coming back because I wanted to know if she was okay. She was letting me get closer, not because her instincts were breaking down. She was choosing to. On day 7, a baseline came through the broken window after her. Her shoulders went tight. I stood up. I walked to the door. I shoved my palm into the baseline's chest. 60-second restoration. Blue light. The zombie wandered off in the middle of trying to remember how to use its hands. The system pinged a level 1 reward I didn't even check. I sat back down on the floor. She stared at me. That night when I got up to leave, she followed me to the door. The system pinged. Yuki. Affection level 2 unlocked. Reward, sleeping bag, first aid kit, cooking supplies, basic. The supplies thumped down beside me on the sidewalk. I stood there with a sleeping bag in my hands, looking at the zombie girl in the doorway who'd just been named by the system. Yuki, I said. She tilted her head. I went outside, set up camp against the wall of the shop, and slept for the first time in 7 days under something other than a wrecked vehicle. I opened my eyes the next morning, and Yuki was standing in the window staring at me. The second I looked at her, she whipped her head away like she hadn't been watching me sleep for 3 hours. I got up. I stretched. I pulled out the cooking supplies the system had dropped. A small portable burner, a steel cup, 2 seasoning sachets, and set up a small fire on the cracked sidewalk. She watched the whole thing from inside the window frame, tilting her head every time I did something new, like a cat that had never seen a can opener before. We fell into a routine over the next 10 days that looked insane from the outside, but made sense if you were inside it. Every morning I cooked rice in front of the shop while she watched. Every morning I came inside, sat on the floor and talked, not about anything important. The weather, a weird-looking building 3 blocks east, how the rice tasted slightly better with the system's clean water than it did with the rainwater I was boiling out of the rooftop barrels. She never responded, but she was listening. Day 9, she sat down on her own for the first time. Day 10, she picked up a fallen flower from the floor and put it back on the shelf. Day 11, I caught her cross-legged in the same position as me, mirroring my hand on her own knee. While she stayed at the shop, I worked the surrounding blocks. The system rewarded each affection level 1 contact with a basic supply drop, usually a meal's worth of canned food and a half-liter of water, sometimes a bandage roll, occasionally something more useful like a flashlight. My process was simple. Walk up, touch, wait 60 seconds, collect, move. The 60-second windows were brutal. A middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform grabbed my wrist when she came back, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Tell my son I'm sorry," before the light faded. I wrote his name down on a torn page from her uniform pocket. I had no way of contacting anyone in the safe zone. A teenage kid in a school uniform started crying the second his eyes cleared and kept saying, "I don't want to go back," until the timer ran out and he went silent. A man in a stained chef's coat. I noted the apron. No idea then it would matter. Came back asking what had happened to his restaurant. I logged each one. I came back to the shop with a full backpack. When I got back, Yuki took one sniff of the air, turned her body fully to the wall, and gave me the silent treatment, which was an impressive thing to pull off when you were already silent. I put food between us. She ignored it. I pulled a small purple wildflower out of my jacket. I'd picked it on the way back without thinking about why, and set it next to the rice. She looked at the flower. She looked at me. She tucked it into her hair next to the fungal ones, turned back around, and gave me a look that translated to "forgiven, but I'm watching you." After that, I brought her a flower every time I came back. She arranged each one in her hair using a piece of broken glass as a mirror. By day 14, I'd moved the sleeping bag inside the shop after I noticed she stood guard at the window every night I slept outside. I'd found her a notepad and a pencil, figuring if she was conscious enough to get jealous, she was conscious enough to write. But she'd been holding the pencil for 2 days without writing anything, like she was waiting for the right thing to say. We sat side by side now, not across from each other. That night I was talking about how you could see every star in the sky since the bloom killed the light pollution. It was the most I'd ever said in one sitting, and I was saying it to a girl who couldn't answer. Then her hand slid across the floor and her cold fingers wrapped around mine. I closed my hand around hers without hesitating. The scar on my palm lit up. The blue light rippled across her whole body. Her violet eyes went clear brown. She was looking at me, fully human, for the first time. She opened her mouth and nothing came out. She squeezed my hand harder. She grabbed the notepad. She wrote 3 shaky words. "I can hear you." The system pinged level 3. I wasn't looking at it. We sat like that for 12 minutes. The longest restoration I'd held to that point. When her eyes started clouding, she wrote one more thing before the pencil slipped from her fingers. "Come back tomorrow." I wasn't going to leave. The next morning I got to work. I broke down the wreck of an awning across the street and dragged the steel poles over to the flower shop. I anchored a reinforced tarp against the outer wall as my sleeping quarters. I scavenged a small generator from a half-flooded electronics store 2 streets up, a Honda EU2200i, still mostly intact, and ran a fuel line from a gas station that hadn't burned. I ran a wire through the broken window, so there was a single warm bulb burning inside the shop. When I finished and sat down exhausted on the curb, Yuki did something she'd never done. She walked out of the shop, outside, on her own. She stood next to me and looked at the camp I'd built. Then she looked at me. She reached down and tucked a flower behind my ear, the same way I'd been doing for her. I looked up at her. She covered her mouth with her hand and did the silent laugh, shoulders shaking, eyes crinkling, the most human thing she'd done since the bloom. Then I picked up my bag and went out for the day's run because the supplies didn't farm themselves, and Yuki watched me go from the doorway like she was already counting the minutes. I'd settled into a rhythm, about 15 baseline restorations a day, average yield 3 to 4 meals worth of supplies, plus the occasional gear drop. The system was clearly weighting the rewards by how much emotional engagement happened during the 60 seconds. The crying ones fed me better than the zoned out ones, which I tried not to think about too hard. A woman in a torn dress grabbed my arm during her 60 seconds and started giving me an address. Her daughter, 6 years old, last known location, please. She got through half the street name before the timer ran out, and her hand went limp. An old man in a janitor's uniform looked at the sky during his 60 seconds, said, "Oh, it's still going," like he'd just woken up from a nap, asked if his wife had made it. I didn't know. He nodded, said, "She's tough, she probably did." The light left his eyes mid-sentence. A boy who looked about 15 came back and immediately started apologizing to someone who wasn't there, saying, "I'm sorry I didn't come home," over and over until the timer ran out. I was getting fed by giving people 60 seconds of being human in a world that had taken it away from them. The system counted it as a successful interaction. I wasn't sure what I counted it as. I came back to the shop with the bag full. Yuki grabbed my hand before I even sat down. The blue kicked in. Her eyes cleared. She snatched the notepad and wrote with aggressive energy, holding it up. "How many did you touch today?" "About 15. How many were girls?" I thought about it. 8 or 9. She stared at me for 5 long seconds, wrote "too many," and underlined it twice. The next day on the run, a female zombie in a torn waitress uniform came back crying and grabbed my sleeve with both hands, holding on like I was the only real thing in the world, which from her perspective I was. Yuki was watching from around a corner with an expression that could curdle milk. The second the timer ended and the woman let go, Yuki walked over, grabbed my sleeve in the exact same spot the other girl had been holding, and shoved her notepad in my face. "She can find her own human." I read it. I looked at Yuki. I pulled a flower out of my bag and tucked it behind her ear. Her glare held for 2 seconds before it cracked. She turned away so I couldn't see her face. She didn't let go of my sleeve for the entire walk back. That evening, we sat together for 30 minutes, our longest restoration to date, and she filled 3 full pages. Most of it was small. "I think my favorite color is blue. The generator sounds like a cat purring. You smell like outside, which I don't like." Then she got quiet and wrote slower. I don't remember my name. You call me Yuki. Is that what I was before? I told her I didn't know. The system had tagged her Yuki when I started bonding with her. That was all I had. She thought about it, tapping the pencil against the pad. Then she wrote, I like it. It sounds like snow. Snow is clean. She wrote one more line before the restoration faded. I don't remember who I was, but I know who I am now. I'm the girl in the flower shop who waits for you to come back. Her hand went slack in mine. I took the pencil from her fingers. I put the notepad in her lap so it'd be ready for tomorrow. I sat next to her in the dark for a long time. I woke on day 20 to groaning. Not the one zombie shuffling past kind. The deep, layered, dozens moving together kind. A horde. I got up and looked through the broken window. At least 30 baselines were coming down the commercial street toward the shop in a loose pack, bumping into cars and walls and each other. Yuki was already standing behind me, fully alert in her aware state, gripping my sleeve and pulling me toward the back of the shop. The back of the shop wasn't a plan. The horde was already too close and the front wall was a giant broken window. I walked outside. I touched the first one I reached. Palm to the face. Blue light. 60 seconds. It froze and the two behind it stumbled around its stopped body. I touched another. Each freezing mid-step as the light hit it, building a wall of confused, blinking, temporarily human people between me and the rest of the horde. The system was pinging rewards so fast the notifications were stacking on top of each other. I wasn't reading them. It worked for 2 minutes. Then 3 baselines came around the side of the shop from a direction I hadn't covered. One of them swiped across my back before I could turn. The claw tore through my jacket and opened a gash from my shoulder blade to my lower ribs. I dropped to one knee. The pain was immediate and very specific. I could feel blood soaking through the shirt and pooling at my belt. The zombie raised its hand for a second hit, then it staggered sideways because Yuki was there, in front of me, arms out, teeth bared, hissing at all 3 with her body between them and mine. They paused, confused. Whatever pheromones a baseline used to read targets weren't reading her right. That was enough time. The rest of the horde lost interest and drifted off in different directions over the next 90 seconds. Once the last one was out of sight, Yuki dropped to her knees beside me. Her hands were shaking. She looked at the blood on my back. She made a small broken sound, the closest she could come to a word, and grabbed my arm, pulled me up, dragged me back into the shop, sat me against the wall, and started ripping strips off the bottom of her own shirt to press against the wound. Her fingers were cold against my skin and she was working fast and frantic, tying the strips tight around my torso with clumsy, desperate hands. She was crying. No sound. She couldn't make sound. But tears were running down her pale blue cheeks and dripping off her jaw, and she kept wiping them with the back of her wrist and going right back to bandaging, like if she stopped moving, she'd fall apart. I reached out and took her hand. The blue light pulsed. Her eyes cleared instantly, both brown. She looked at me with full awareness while tears were still running down her now warm cheeks. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The frustration mixed with the fear and the relief, and she just broke. She wrapped her arms around me, careful of the wound, buried her face in my neck, and held on with her whole body shaking. I hesitated for half a second, then I held her back. She was warm now. I could feel her silent crying against my shoulder. My blood was soaking through the makeshift bandages. The shop was quiet except for the sound of my breathing and the small, hitched, ragged ones she was trying not to make. We stayed like that for a long time. The system pinged. Yuki, affection level 4, unlocked. Reward, shelter module, motorcycle, rare antifungal medicine. A prefab shelter module materialized 20 meters from the shop in a shimmer of blue. A motorcycle appeared next to it. A Yamaha XT250, dual sport, full tank. A case of medicine landed beside the bike that I was definitely going to need. Neither of us looked at the rewards. Neither of us let go yet. When the restoration timer finally ran out, almost 40 minutes, the longest yet, her eyes clouded back and her grip slowly loosened. She didn't pull away. She stayed pressed against my side, cold again, quiet again, close. I sat against the wall of the flower shop, bleeding, holding a zombie girl who'd just thrown herself between me and a horde because she'd rather be torn apart than watch me get hurt. I'd been kidding myself for a week. I was already past falling. A voice came from the street. Hey, is someone alive in there? Because I've been walking 3 days, I'm about to pass out, and if you're a zombie, I'm going to be really disappointed. Loud, raspy, completely human. I turned my head. A guy was standing in the middle of the street, mid-20s, messy brown hair, cracked orange goggles pushed up on his forehead, built like a brawler, swaying on his feet. He squinted at the broken window, took in the picture. Me bleeding against the wall, Yuki pressed under my arm, motorcycle and shelter module sitting outside in matching shimmers, and his face went through 5 different emotions in 2 seconds. Bro, you're sitting in a flower shop in the middle of the dead zone, with the prettiest zombie I've ever seen cuddling up on you like a girlfriend, and you've got a motorcycle and a whole shelter just sitting outside. How is any of this fair? I looked at him. I looked at Yuki. I looked back at him. There's rice inside. He walked in, sat down across from us on the floor, ate 3 cans of rice without stopping to breathe, and passed out face down on the floorboards. Yuki watched the whole thing from my side and pulled the notepad onto her knee, writing one-handed because she wasn't letting go of my sleeve. I don't like him. I read it. For the first time since the exile, I smiled. His name was Tetsu Kinoshita, B-tier carrier. Ability called Thermal Sight. Heat signatures through walls up to 200 meters. He'd been exiled out of the same safe zone 3 weeks before me for punching a commanding officer who'd been hoarding antibiotics from civilians. He'd been moving through the dead zone alone since. He fit into my situation the way a brick fits into a fishbowl, loudly, messily, and with zero awareness of personal space. He'd already given Yuki a nickname by the second morning, Snow Princess. She turned her back to him every time he said it, but he was useful. The thermal sight let him spot baselines through walls before they spotted us, which meant no more horde ambushes from blind angles. He took the night watch without being asked. The second morning he woke me up by whispering, 12 of them, moving east. They'll pass us in 11 minutes. Go back to sleep, and went back to his post. I spent the next 3 days healing using the antifungal from the level 4 reward, which doubled as a regenerative for non-fungal wounds, apparently a bonus. And during those 3 days, the hand-holding sessions with Yuki got longer, 40 minutes, then 50, then a full hour with her sitting next to me, fully restored, writing on her notepad, leaning against my shoulder while Tetsu pretended not to watch from across the room. She was filling the notepad faster now. She wrote about things she almost remembered, the smell of something baking, a window with blue curtains, a voice calling her name that she couldn't quite hear. She wrote about things she did know, that my jacket smelled like smoke and rain, that my hands were always warm, that I chewed the left side of my mouth when I was thinking. She was memorizing me and writing. She was afraid she'd forget when the restoration faded. On day 25, during a morning session, she wrote something and held the notepad against her chest for a long time before she showed me. I don't want to forget you again. I didn't say anything. I looked at her. She was watching my face with those clear brown eyes, waiting for whatever I was going to do with my expression. I let her see it. She reached up and touched my face with her free hand, traced the line of my jaw with warm fingers, and then the timer ran out, and her hand went cold against my cheek, and her eyes clouded, and she was gone again. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the sleeping bag, listening to the generator hum, while Tetsu snored in the corner, and Yuki stood by the window in her zombie state, watching the dark, like she always did when the restoration wasn't active. I watched her silhouette against the moonlight, the flowers in her hair, the way she tilted her head slightly to the left like she was listening to something far away. I made a decision. I got up. I walked over to her. She saw me coming and her whole body relaxed. She looked up at my face with one brown eye and one violet, and even half reverted, she was looking at me like I was the only thing in the world that made sense. The system flashed in my vision. Affection, level 5 conditions met. Mutual bond confirmed. Awaiting checkpoint. I wasn't reading it. She rose up on her toes and leaned toward me. Even half reverted, she was choosing this. She was choosing me. I leaned down and closed the distance. The bloom infection cracked off her body the second our lips met. It didn't fade. It shattered. Lines of blue light split across her skin from her lips outward like cracks in a sheet of frosted glass. The fungal flowers in her hair wilted and dropped. Her violet eye bled back to brown. The pale blue of her skin flushed living color until there was nothing left of the zombie she'd been a second earlier. The system went off like a fireworks show. Soul-bound bond established. Yuki, permanent restoration complete. Major reward. Heartbeat house unlocked. Safe zone barrier active. Radius 200 meters. A sound like a deep heartbeat pulsed through the ground. 50 meters from the shop, a house rose out of the earth in a wave of blue light. 2 stories, reinforced walls, real windows, a porch, a front door with a brass knocker, a sloped roof with chimney. A shimmering blue dome expanded out from the house, settled over a 200-meter radius, and every baseline within range stumbled backward as if they'd hit an invisible wall. Tetsu sat up from a dead sleep, saw a whole house in a force field outside the broken window, said, "What the hell did I miss?" and lay back down because his brain wasn't ready. I wasn't looking at the house. I was looking at Yuki standing in front of me with both eyes brown and warm, her fingers touching her own face like she was making sure she was real. She looked up at me. Her voice came out rough and barely there. "You waited for me." She stepped forward and pressed her forehead against my chest. I wrapped my arms around her and held on. Tetsu, on the floor, with the sense of self-preservation he'd been hiding all along, pretended to fall back asleep. We walked into Heartbeat House an hour later. Yuki went through every room, touching everything, like she'd forgotten what a home felt like. When she found the bedroom upstairs, she sat on the bed and looked at me with an expression that made it clear this wasn't a discussion. I sat down next to her. She leaned against my shoulder. Inside of 5 minutes, she was asleep. For the first time since the exile, I slept without dreaming. The three of us settled into the house over the next few days like it had always been ours. Tetsu took the second bedroom. Yuki took mine. I went back out for daily runs. The system kept dropping basic supplies for affection level 1 contacts, which was the bulk of my income. I was building up stocks, water, canned goods, flashlight batteries, basic medical. When I noticed something on day 28 that changed the equation, I'd been working on a female zombie for 3 days. The woman in the chef's coat I'd touched on the first run from the shop. I'd found her again near the same wrecked restaurant, Komatsu Diner. The sign still hung over the alley, and built up level 2 familiarity by sitting in the booth across from her for an hour with the door open. On day 28, I tried something. I started walking. She followed me at about 10 meters. She trailed me all the way back. When we reached Heartbeat House, I held the front door open and stepped aside. She walked through the threshold. She snapped to fully human the instant her feet crossed inside. She didn't reset after 60 seconds. She kept being human. She started crying on the floor of my entryway. Yuki walked downstairs, took in the woman in the stained chef's coat sobbing on the rug, looked at me with an expression that said, "Explain." A system notification floated quietly into my vision. House restoration active. Subject restored to full human status within Heartbeat House barrier. Restoration persists, while subject remains inside the dome. I read it twice. I just figured out the most broken mechanic in the apocalypse. Any zombie I led through the front door stayed human as long as they were inside. No affection level, no timer. The house did the work. The woman's name was Hanako Nishimura. She'd been the head chef at the Komatsu Diner before the bloom. She cried for 15 minutes straight while Yuki sat beside her and held her hand without saying anything, because Yuki knew exactly what coming back from being dead felt like, and she knew there was nothing you could say that helped more than just being there. When Hanako could talk again, she asked 3 questions. How long had she been a zombie? 3 months? Was her family alive? I didn't know. Was there a kitchen? There was. The moment she saw it, she walked in, opened every cabinet, checked the gas, ran the water in the sink and said, "I can work with this," with a voice still shaky from crying, but steady enough to recognize the professional underneath. That night, Hanako cooked the first real meal any of us had eaten since the bloom. Soy-glazed rice with reconstituted scallions she'd somehow found in my pantry. A soft-set egg from a stash I hadn't unpacked yet. Miso made from a paste sachet that had been sitting in the supply pile for 2 weeks. Tetsu took 1 bite and immediately started tearing up. "I'm not crying, it's the onions." "There are no onions." "Then it's allergies." "Shut up." Yuki ate slowly, tasting every bite, and wrote on her notepad, "Better than canned rice." She held it up. I nodded. From me, that was a standing ovation. She knew it. The next morning, a 3rd bedroom appeared on the 2nd floor of the house. It had a kitchen counter and a spice rack built into the wall. When Hanako found it, she cried again, because the system somehow knew exactly who she was. I told her the rule. The house kept her human. Step outside, revert. The only way to make it permanent was reaching soulbound with me. Mutual bond, sealed with a kiss. System registered. Hanako looked at me, looked at Yuki, who was leaning against my shoulder with the proprietary calm of a woman who had been there first, looked back at me. "So, the cure is falling in love with you." Tetsu choked on his breakfast. Yuki gave Hanako a look that said yes, and in case you were wondering, I was first. I picked up another zombie that afternoon, a woman in a cardigan and slacks, sitting motionless on the steps of an abandoned elementary school. Her name was Miki Sakamoto. She'd been a teacher. She walked through my front door, snapped human, didn't cry. She just went very quiet and sat on the floor staring at the wall for a long time before she asked if there were any children in the house. There weren't. She said okay and didn't say anything else for the rest of the day. Hanako brought her tea. Hanako stayed. Miki's room appeared overnight with bookshelves built into the walls and a reading lamp by the bed. 2 new residents, 2 new rooms. The house was growing. That evening we sat around the kitchen table while Hanako served dinner. Tetsu was talking with his mouth full. Mickey was reading. Yuki was pressed against my side, writing something. She held it up. Our house is getting full. She added a line below. I like it. I was 3 blocks east on a supply run the next morning when Tetsu's voice came through the walkie-talkie, sounding scared for the first time since I'd met him. Get back. Now. I'm reading a wave of heat signatures coming up from the south, fast, and they're not baseline movement, they're sprinting. I sprinted. By the time I cleared the last building, I could see them. At least 100 evolved pouring out of the nearest bloom crater 2 streets over, fast and twitching with fungal growths covering half their bodies, a kind I'd only seen at a distance until now. Bloom surge. Tetsu was on the roof of the house with a length of sharpened rebar, which was brave and also stupid. Inside, Yuki was at the front door with the metal bat I'd taught her to swing, telling me with her hands that she could feel them coming from every direction. The barrier held the first wave. The evolved were stronger. After 2 minutes of pounding, the dome started flickering in and out at the edges. Then a girl with short silver hair came through the dome wall, through it, like the barrier wasn't even there. She landed inside the perimeter mid-stride, never broke pace, came back out the dome on the other side, phasing through 3 evolved without making contact, kicked one in the throat as she rematerialized, and dropped 2 more before any of them figured out what was happening. Tetsu watched from the roof. I think I'm in love. Yuki at the front door wrote focus on her notepad and held it up toward the roof without looking. The silver-haired girl fought through 20 evolved in the time it took me to figure out who she was. Phase walk. 3 seconds of intangibility on a cooldown I couldn't time from where I was. A-tier. Military fatigues with the patches torn off. She wasn't fighting to save us. She'd been running from the surge and the house had been in her path. Once she'd seen the barrier and realized people were inside, old habits had taken over. The fight lasted about 20 minutes. She handled the evolved. Tetsu called positions from the roof. I worked the perimeter, touching baselines on the edges to confuse them and break their pack instinct. Yuki came out behind me with her bat and swung at anything that got too close. The horde finally thinned. The barrier flickered, steadied, held. The silver-haired girl was sitting on the asphalt outside the barrier, breathing hard, bleeding from a deep cut on her arm. I walked up. I held out a hand. Come inside. She looked up at me. Fine, but I'm not staying. She was staying. Her name was Rin Tsukishima, former A-tier carrier in a safe zone 2 cities over. She'd deserted after watching her entire squad get used as bait during a bloom crater clearance. She'd been in the dead zone alone for 41 days. After the surge passed, I noticed 2 female zombies still nearby. One had hidden behind a wrecked car for the entire fight instead of attacking. The other had stood still in the middle of the chaos, staring at the house like she knew what it was. The hiding one was Sora Yamashita, civil engineer. I sat with her for an hour until her shoulders unclenched and walked her home behind me. The first thing she said when she crossed the threshold and snapped human was, "Who built this? The load-bearing wall is wrong." The still one was Nana Watanabe, combat medic, self-defense forces. She didn't react to anything. When I touched her, she came back for 60 seconds and said, "Are there wounded?" in a voice that was still on duty. I built her up to level 2 over 2 visits and led her home. She walked through the door and immediately started checking everyone for injuries, whether they wanted her to or not. Rin wouldn't let her near the cut on her arm. Nana was patient. Nana won. 2 more rooms? Sora's appeared with a drafting table built into the wall and a set of architect's pencils in the drawer. Nana's appeared with a first aid station and a row of medical supplies along one wall. The house was at 6 rooms. That night, everyone sat at the kitchen table eating Hanako's cooking. Rin at the far end, eating with one hand, not talking. Sora sketching the house's floor plan on a napkin and muttering about the kitchen weight distribution. Nana tying Rin's bandage tighter while Rin told her to stop, and Nana ignored her. Yuki leaned against my shoulder and held up the notepad. 6 rooms now, we need a bigger table. Hanako had been leaving food outside my door every night for a week and pretending she had no idea how it got there. Yuki knew. Mickey knew. Tetsu knew. The only person pretending not to know was Hanako, who turned red and started chopping vegetables aggressively whenever anyone brought it up. She fell for me the way a chef falls for the one person who actually appreciates her cooking. I ate everything she made without complaint. I brought her ingredients from runs. One morning I walked into the kitchen while she was prepping breakfast and said, "This tastes like home," about a rice porridge she'd thrown together from canned stock and dried herbs, and she had to turn back to the stove because her eyes were doing something she didn't want me to see. It built through small things. I noticed when she changed a recipe. I sat in the kitchen while she cooked, even when I didn't need to be there. One night she was stress cooking at 2 a.m. because she'd had a nightmare about reverting and forgetting how to make her grandmother's sauce. I came downstairs without saying anything, sat at the counter, and stayed until she was done. She put a plate in front of me. I ate it. She watched me eat. If I step outside that door, I won't remember how to make this. Then I'll bring you back inside and you'll learn it again. She stared at me for a long time. That's the dumbest, most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. She kissed me before either of us could think about it. The bloom cracked off her body in a ripple of blue light. The system pinged. Soulbound bond established. Hanako, permanent restoration complete. Reward, full kitchen module, daily food supply, tier 1. She pulled back and looked at her hands, not shaking. She could feel it. The infection was gone, completely and permanently, no barrier dependency. She could walk outside whenever she wanted. She was free. The next morning she looked at me at the stove. I'm still cooking breakfast. I know. She turned back to the burner and started crying into the rice porridge, and Yuki walked downstairs, took one look, and wrapped her arms around Hanako from behind without saying anything. Wife number 2. Unlocked. Rin was harder. She didn't want to be saved. She didn't want to fall in love. She called me captain instead of my name and kept her distance from everyone at meals. She handled combat and scouting and did her job and went to her room, and that was it. I didn't push. I assigned her missions she was good at. I praised her tactical reads in front of the others. I never asked her to open up. She noticed, which made it worse, because she'd been counting on me being pushy, so she'd have an excuse to keep her walls up. The crack came during a scouting run 3 days after Hanako's bond. Rin was outside the barrier checking the perimeter when she ran into a pack of evolved she hadn't expected. She fought through most of them, but took a hit to the ribs, and her phase walk was on the back end of its cooldown, and for 10 seconds, she was in real trouble. I walked outside the barrier toward the fight. Tetsu yelled from the roof that I had zero combat ability. What was I doing? Get back inside. I kept walking. I reached her. I grabbed her arm and pulled her back toward the barrier while she was yelling at me that I was an idiot. I could have died. What was I thinking? You were in trouble. I can handle myself. I know, but you don't have to. She stared at me. She punched my shoulder hard enough to bruise and walked back inside without another word. That night she came to dinner and sat one chair closer to the group than usual. The next morning she called me Kaido instead of captain. Everyone at the table noticed. Nobody said anything because we all knew better. A week later we were on the watchtower at night. I'd been keeping watch, Tetsu's night off, and she'd come up with 2 cups of bad coffee and sat down next to me. She told me about her squad, how the military had used them as bait, how she'd watched them die while she phased through a wall to get clear, how she'd been running ever since and didn't know how to stop. I listened. When she was done, I said one thing. You stopped here. She looked at me for a long time. Then she kissed me, short and fast and fierce, like she was angry at herself for wanting it. The bloom had never been in her body. She'd been a living carrier the whole time, but the system still registered the bond. Soul-bound, bond established. Rin, permanent bond confirmed. Reward, armory module, war room, daily tactical intel feed. She pulled back. Don't make a big deal out of this. Okay. I mean it. Okay. She punched my shoulder again, same spot, and went to her room. Yuki was at the bottom of the watchtower with her notepad open. It said one word with 3 underlines. Finally, wife number 3, unlocked. That night, I lay in the bedroom with Yuki curled against my side, looking at the ceiling. 3 soul-bound bonds, a house that kept growing, a team getting stronger every week, a barrier that the military didn't have, an ability the head officer with the lemon face had stamped E tier on a piece of paper. I thought about that officer for a second, and then stopped thinking about him. Yuki traced circles on my chest with her finger. Her voice was rough, but getting clearer every day she stayed restored. Hanako cried into the rice porridge again. Happy crying or sad crying? Happy. She's free now. Good. A pause. Rin punched you. I know. Twice. Same shoulder. She pressed closer. I was first. I know. She smiled against my shoulder and went to sleep. I lay awake for a while after, listening to the generator humming in the basement, the wind moving past the dome, Tetsu's snoring from the next room. The barrier shimmered faintly through the window. Somewhere in the dark beyond it, the dead zone was still doing whatever the dead zone did at 3 a.m. Somewhere further out, the safe zone walls were still standing, still rationing, still stamping people. The system pinged once. Quiet. Affection levels stable. Household, 7. Barrier, holding. Standing reward queue, 3. I closed my hand over Yuki's, the most useless ability in the apocalypse. Sure, I closed my eyes.